We're going to discuss the in-depth experience of someone spiritual who's been from birth aware of an openness in their consciousness called God, eternity. You can read the writings of Rumi or any great spiritual poet from beginning of time, any mystic, and the words they say are not outlandish. What they say are the basic consciousness of all spiritual people. All spiritual people perceive a delicateness in their atmosphere that's endlessly more refined, more pure, more human, basically eternal in their consciousness. There are no edges or borders unto this awareness. And the point for today will be that, I remember mentioning a friend in Tibet one time, then they walled him in and they'd cement and put bricks all around a little place that he lived in, and somehow they'd get food to him now and then. And they'd live around, and they live for the rest of their life in this little hovel in the mountains, in prayer and in meditation. And the point I made about it at the time was, he's not crazy. To be close to God requires not giving up anything. You become immeasurable in your consciousness, in your awareness. God himself looks out from our eyes. And there's nothing to fight, no sides to take with anything. And it's something transcendent of love, transcendent of beauty and kindness. It's transcendent of a word called truth, because it actually is infinite. And when you're quiet, you're calm, you're aware of God, you want or need nothing, and yet these waves of unimaginable beauty, infinite joy, happiness is just there all the time, and yet it's subtle. And beyond that, which is heaven, there's a little place called the throne of grace where God resides. It's like, imagine the power of something like, they talk about black holes in the universe where everything's sucked in, whole galaxies and so forth. Well, that's the sense you get when you go to this place. You fall inside yourself in a sense of humility. And you'll discover God to be infinitely humble. And getting right back to the point, the difference of this consciousness, where you give nothing up, you become present. In a sense, you're a gift to the whole world, but no one will ever understand this. No one ever has. So it's up to us, the individual, to lock us in our little hovel, our little apartment, our home, our awareness. We're hidden intentionally. Because we're pure, we're kind, we're healing, we're decent, we're instructive, we're protective. And very few will ever know that. And that's okay. Is that making sense? You want or need nothing. You appreciate the unutterable beauty of the divine. That includes the unutterable beauty of all those that you find that are contrite, intelligent, aware, decent, artistic, that are driven by something beyond themselves. Sometimes they talk about certain great artists who were basically out of their mind in some way, but that's rarely the truth. There are certain people with certain personality disorders that were great painters from the Italian Renaissance period or whatever, but it's you're living in this world. You can't communicate to anyone because no one will ever, ever, ever listen to you. I mean, truly, quietly listen to you without any intent of their own, just to be there for you. Like Rachel would be with her child, just there. That's what a mom does. Imagine what a God does. And imagine that everything that a God does is only for you. For from time to time, he speaks to us. And when he does, it's as though we're the only person in the world. Because to God, we are the only person in the world. So when you're touched by that, and then the next moment, it's as though it never happened. Because God's speaking from that place beyond eternity, beyond heaven, where God actually resides. And when you know this, and you don't want or need anything of the world, you will appreciate the heavens. So you're not crazy. And you'll have many gifts and powers. You'll have the peace to outlast any adversary. It's the old adage that if you sit by the river long enough, you'll watch the bodies of all your enemies pass by. Point being, like when you're listening to someone, when you're battling someone. My buddy Greg here is a 9th degree martial artist and an altar boy. When you get him in the ring, you can't beat him, you can't fight him, and you'll never know that because he's an altar boy. An altar boy. The point being, you don't have to fight anyone. If you are in this state, you will be protected. God actually is God. This world that seems to be is a mirage. It's a mistaken consciousness. There's nothing to it. To those in the world that are spiritual, but we don't know that because spiritual people are always placed in the corner and they have to lock themselves in and try to give as much as they can because no one actually ever listens to them. If you read the writings of all the great saints of the world, they're all saying the same thing, but it's because they're pushed in a corner and they can't really describe their own experience because it's too pure. And if you're spiritual, we're circumspect, we're respectful of everyone else, but we can't say what we really feel. The people here would be called, they're all very spiritual, very kind, very true, very decent, and when you become a good teacher, in India they would call you Satguru, which means a perfected instrument. What you say, what you feel, what you experience comes right from God. But you rarely get to say that, to express it openly. That's why people are hidden in mountain retreats, in caves, little studio apartments all around the world. I've met many, many people who have, of every kind of existence that are spiritual, and I'm just saying for all of us is spiritual, and we recognize one another's spirituality instantly, and it's just there's a quiet together, and nothing needs to be said or not said. I remember looking at 5 enlightened lamas in northern India, I guess, in 1971, with my friend Frida and an abbotess, and for a hairline of a second I wanted to say something, but they were all living the same life. Every spiritual person in the world is living the same life. We're trying to do where we are the best we can to uplift, to heal. And the main message of today is if we quietly step back from all of it and just acknowledge it, yeah, that's a sociopath. The whole world is a sociopath. It's a conscious being. It's projected by something called Satan, Mephistopheles, and many, many other names we hear in our daily vernacular, the control freak. Right? It's an energy that will very, very, very subtly suck you in if you let it. And if you very, very subtly don't care, it will flee from you. The devil fears one righteous person more than 1,000 blind believers. And all this is in consciousness. It doesn't matter how hard you work. I've done this in the mountains. I've done this where I'd work 12 hours a day selling vegetables on a stand. This, I'm saying for me, if you read the writings, will say of Brother Lawrence, he wrote Practice the Presence, or I don't know if that's what he titled it, but it was he chose to work in the kitchen as when he was a brother maybe 400 years ago somewhere in Europe, and he didn't leave writings and so forth, but he was so close to God, he preferred just to work in the kitchen because he was disappeared into heaven. You can work in your garden, you can love your children, and you can be holy and enlightened, or you can be a normal person. There's no judgment one way or the other. To the enlightened, the experience is so transcendent, so wonderful. If you look closely at a Rembrandt, you can't breathe. I used to look at the sunflower at a museum of Van Gogh, and I'd just sit 4 hours, I couldn't move. Just to put God on canvas with some paint is, it's a miracle. So when people would question his sanity, well, when you're driven that deeply to go check the lighting or a different time of the day or a different country or the pigment or so forth and so on, and it's a spiritual endeavor to create beauty. It's something you know it can be, so you're driven to do that. And most people are driven kind of halfway insane because they can never get it perfect because they're trying to say that they know that that's there. Today's thought is that, yes, God is here. Of course. And how could it have anything to do with the world that's seen? It doesn't. God is a presence of infinite purity. And in the center of that, there's something called divine providence. So, hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. You know, it's the idea that there's divine providence behind that there is one God and there's this power behind it of absolute truth. So you have to align yourself with that. And when you do that, like the Christians would say, well, you know, blessed in the blood of Jesus or whatever, it would be to eradicate that force of evil. And what we're saying right now is like, give it nothing. If Greg's going to go into the ring, or my buddy, the professor here, Pedro, they never fight the other person's game. They're going to bring on theirs. And so if you know that there's one God and that God is always with you, God will never, 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 never not be with us. It's just for us to eradicate all the conditioned thought forms we have about this world from birth to the present, quietly, and not react to anything. And then you'll feel God listening to you, being with you, enamored of you more greatly than your puppy. That's the God that God is. And when you're aware of that, you'll be aware of something equally supernatural. That God, all God will ever do in eternity is give God's self away to you. That's why you can peer out into the great expanse, the vastness of eternity. If I want to see my mom, or this, or heaven, or the holy ones of past and future times, or different star systems, it's just... And because this experience is so overwhelming and different than anyone's ability to perceive, all the spiritual are trapped alone again in their hovel. But they're not crazy, and there's nothing wrong with us. God's aware of us. We could say listens to us. So if someone is spiritual and they come see me over the years, I'm there. There's no Robert Rosenberg there. Does that make sense? I might, like today, use myself as an example because I've never not been aware of this. So all of us are spiritual. We've never not been aware that there's something deeper, more powerful, more wonderful within us. And if we might have an insular existence where we're happy and fulfilled in our life, and we think, no, life is okay, and I'm making it okay. Well, are you brain dead? There's 8 billion people in the world, right? Are they happy, or how could you live with that? I couldn't. I'm a child, I'd be aware of all the different calamities of the world, and knowing that most of it was unreal. trying to express the fact that I always, or all spiritual people, again, using myself as an example, that are hundreds of millions of us, I guess, we just look through everything. There's this soft, delicate presence, like this wonderful little glow on the grassy fields in front of us. And that glow is God. That glow is our own body. We are our soul. We're not our problems or the solution to our problems. We're made of something so wonderful, so kind, so decent, so dear, so pure. And if we know that, we don't have to hide if we know that. So I'll sit alone in my chair all day and I'm not hiding from the devil because I don't care. I'm not going to make a confront about it. That's silly. If someone needs help, I'll know who and when, and I'll be there for them. Otherwise, go home and read another book and write another book and just be aware until the next time. I waited 50 years to do this. And that doesn't mean anything. There's not a complaint. There's not even a statement about it. Again, sit by the river long enough. You see? There's no one to fight. And you always do it by your rules. The first rule being that it's called an illusion. In Sanskrit, it's an illusion, Maya. It means it's not really here. The Buddha said, you will visit the house of your illusion no more. I know when I walked through the deer park where the Buddha had his university 2,500 years ago, it's still there. If you're spiritual, you still see it. It's just a field and you'll have some parts of a building left over and it's just there. If you're spiritual, you see it. When I watched the monks and the lamas and the nuns meditating up in the hills there, I'd walk in and they would be present and disappear. Spiritually, they're all there. And I remember mentioning the dear friend of mine who's a judge, beautiful man, but he could not conceive it. And then I realized you'd have to be spiritual to understand what I'm saying. Everyone in this room is spiritual, so you understand what I'm saying. There is a God. We don't have to live in pain. There's no reason for it. Heaven is here now. God is with us. There is a God. And he is God, but it's all you'll ever find of God is God giving himself away. So we'll give ourselves away spiritually. Of course, we'll all give and help anyone around us that's righteous. You know what I'm saying? We're not stupid. God knows. So we have a very delicate awareness to everything and everyone, and we're going to live that out happily. And we're going to transcend through the illusion. Because heaven is ours. He is our God. We are his people. We are transcendent souls. We're not lost. We're not found. We give nothing up. We become utterly powerful, but it's another universe. Giving the world up, that's the only detail. There is no other detail, and it's in consciousness. We very quietly, first of all, no, I have to say this. Every time you sit down in your chair to meditate, we've all been aware of God all of our lives here in different ways. We're all close to God. And from this moment on, know that every time you ever sit quietly in prayer and meditation at your sacred hour, or if it's from dawn to dawn, illumination, that's your temple. It just is. Always know, every time you sit to reflect, to pray, to contemplate, God, this infinite wonderfulness will always, 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 always be there with us. And it'll be a little different every day. It's not just sitting and doing I've never done that. I've done it different times because friends do that, or I help set something up or whatever, but it's not, it just is this experience. And there's no cost. There's no price. You give nothing up. But always know that God is God, and God will be with you, and it will be different every time. For me, in the last few months, certain people came into my life at different times, and I wanted to do so much. I loved them so much, respected so much, and couldn't really help this way or that way, just like my own mom. And then at a certain point, when you have these friendships, a few months ago in a class, I talked about older people when they come to appreciate and love someone, and they know, and they don't necessarily want to be with that lost love. They just appreciate, and it fills the day. And in spiritual illumination, you don't necessarily want to be with anyone. You don't need or desire, because you can't get anything out of this until everyone in the world that's good is safe. Does that make sense? Example for myself at different times in my life, I felt that if I had anyone near me, they would be a target, too big a target for the dark side, because I know my destiny. That's just one part of there are dozens of ways of visualizing this and understanding and experiencing for ourselves. And stop wanting or needing or grasping on anything, and this will be there. And I'm not saying that like the commandment, it's just the love that God has for us is truly unimaginable. And yet when you step away from the whole thing, this experience called illumination, enlightenment, the vision of God, the beatific vision that Aldous Huxley wrote about, and the perennial philosophy, and it talked about, so much about it was being humble and contrite, and all the mystics who were monk-like in their dealing with life. It's the thing that wasn't stated clearly was the fact, thank you, all this was the satisfaction, the awareness, the happiness of seeing everything as it is, infinite. It's like when William Blake said, when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything will appear as it is, infinite. You will become the Satguru. And when it's right, you will teach, explain, heal anyone, anything. Because that's why you're born. And the world took nothing from us. They just showed us who they are. And now we show them what we are, by not engaging, not needing, not wanting, not desiring. And with that, God himself fills out through our heart like the 1,000-petaled lotus. It's so wonderful to be close to our Father God. We'll need, will not want, will heal, will help, teach, redirect, coach. Nothing we can't do. But it's very delicate. It's hidden purposely because, I'm going to be very honest, I always felt that I hide this because I'm protecting God from the world. Does that make sense? Never said that, but that's the God's truth in me. Because the world is just it's a bully. They just roll right over anything and everyone. You wouldn't want to put your child out in the marketplace unclothed, right? And God is infinite innocence. Our heart and soul is God, is heaven, is forever, is now. No one ever got to heaven by a prayer at the deathbed. People talk about living a good life, and then if you lived a good life, you'll be judged this way, there, and you can go to heaven. That is so stupid. Spiritually speaking, it's an open consciousness. It's a purity. It's now. think Paul said the Bible was written in a mystery, meaning that if you weren't spiritual, you wouldn't understand it. Not that all of writing, the many, many beautiful spiritual passages that I talked about, Rumi, or all these different great writers. I was with a great sheikh, anyway, with him alone, and he wanted me to do something spiritual, healing, and couldn't let any of the people around him know. Anyway, it was spiritual people I've met all over the world, and like, think of an Egyptian friend who came to buy a big building and I was in San Mateo many years ago, and I just had a little studio apartment there, and the owner just took into my apartment for some reason, and he walked in, very, very wealthy and powerful man, but he was spiritual. So we just looked at each other, and he said, "Thank you for letting me enter your inner sanctum." Because you'll recognize this presence, this quiet, this lack of need or want or desire or fear or anger. It's like my buddy Greg is a great artist and made a living as a musician and singer and fine arts for many years. And so you spend time alone with him and at his place, even though he's a fighter, there's a quiet because he loves God. Everyone in this room loves God. I know that. God knows that. So we're free to experience through these words our collective experience of God, of the common experience of spirituality. If we allow ourselves to really, really know this, it's not that we want or need. Will be satisfactions like the great artist, the great satisfaction you get through loving your child, through giving your life to your child. Imagine that taken to extrapolating it out to infinity. And that's who you really are, and that's who you're representing and embodying when you're taking care of those you love. And behind that, there's this secret doorway. My four sisters are very spiritual, my brother James and my parents. Life was very rough, but we were happy, and my sisters would always joke. They would say, behind the plumbing, this little door in my parents' bedroom, you open that. From the time I was 2 years old, you open that up, you look in there, and you'll see heaven. So when no one's around, I go home and I open that up, and I would look in there, and I would see heaven. It's what we are. And if we don't engage this force that projects the imagery and the sanity, the fear, the loathing, the need, the want, if we don't engage it in our consciousness, it won't be here because it's not here. There's this infinite purity called God that we are as spiritual beings. And what's being said, if we honor that completely and are not fooled, not taken, it's not there's something wrong with us but everyone in the world believes in us and it's hitting us 24 hours a day, and because we're contrite and humble, we don't force ourselves on anyone. And that's made us we're like shrunken soldiers, and we don't have to be that. We don't have to stand tall, and we sit quietly. Allow God to illumine our heart, our soul. We disengage from the world in consciousness. And all the different people, like I mentioned, my mom or my different friend, Corinne, the ballerina, who's just died very young, and other friends who were and at this point, they are my teachers, because I see how pure their heart was. There are a number of them. And that's a very relaxing place to be. It's not love or need, it's honoring in a very precious way. All the stuff of the world, all the wildness and the goals and the winning and losing, that's the illusion. That's the casino. It's a sociopathic energy that has nothing behind it. It's a speck of dust, and otherwise infinite wonderland called God, called heaven, most of all, called you. Identify with it in consciousness. It identifies with you in consciousness. Every time we ever sit quietly in prayer to understand, to reflect, to regain our senses, God will always, always, always be there. You'll be aware of infinite dimensions and realms and different rooms of understanding you can enter. The souls of the ancient ones, the great teachers, the Satgurus of all eternity, will be with you forever. And they're your friends. And it might take a few months, 2 to 3 years at most, to not be tempted anymore at all. And the learning curve for this will be commensurate with our need to understand, to know, and most of all, to protect and heal those we love. That's why we do it. That's why we'll step outside of our little hovel from time to time, because we must do this. We must end the whole, well, the falsity. The projection of you know, like Socrates called it the shadows on the wall. You know, it's like kabuki theater. It's anything to get your interest, and if you look right through it, all the archetypes of human endeavor, that he's the this person, that's the that person, this is the librarian, that there is no one has power or place in the world. There are just places in our heart where we discover God anew, every moment, forever. Spiritual consciousness is forever. Spiritual consciousness is for you. All the great miracles and spiritual experiences you've read about or heard or had in our life, it's all for us. And we understand it fully, the world will not be here, because the world has never been here. That's the illusion. There's nothing else to say. Thank you. Thanks, Craig.